Welcome to the very first Wake Up West Coast of our programming year. I am so excited to have you joining us here this morning. My name is Jody Ozarski. I have the privilege of being on the incredible team at the West Coast Chamber, and we are overjoyed to have you here with us this morning as we kick off this program year with a really incredible program here with Zach. We're excited to be back at Hope College and on this beautiful Hope campus, and even more excited to have a big group of Hope College business students with us today. If you're a Hope student, do you want to raise your hand? Love that. We know that as part of the chamber, it's important to work on talent development, and interacting more with students is a big focus for us, so we're thrilled to have those students here with us today. Before we really get rolling, I need to thank some of our sponsors. They help us do what we do. This morning, hopefully you had a chance to stop at AAC Credit Union's table. On the way in, they're our morning mingle sponsor. They're regular supporters of this program. Will you thank them for me? We also have a speaker sponsor this morning, which is different for us, and we'll talk about that more in just a minute. But Huizinga Gamache and Associates brought in our speaker for us today. We could not have done this without them. Please join me in thanking Huizinga Gamache. And then we have a program sponsor. Beth O'Laughlin is here with us from Warner, Norcross, and Judd. This is her very favorite thing to do. And so we've got an opportunity to learn a little bit more about Warner this morning. So Beth, tell us a little bit about Warner and the background of your organization.
Sure, yeah. So for those who aren't familiar, Warner, Norcross, and Judd, it's a full-service law firm, fairly large. It's the second biggest law firm in the state. We've got 8 offices all around. The biggest one's Grand Rapids, that's where most of our people are. And then here in Holland, it's a smaller office. We're over on 8th Street, and there's just 4 attorneys there. Aside from me, it's Jennifer Remendino, Scott DeWeerd, who's hiding in the back corner over there, and Mark Harder. And our Holland office is kind of unique. We really do estate planning is kind of our specialty. So many, if not most of our clients are small business owners, so we can kind of help with the day-to-day business stuff. We do a lot of succession planning, and then just the tax and estate planning. So it's kind of nice to have a smaller office for that more intimate kind of planning, but then we've also got the bigger corporate firm behind us if you've got questions, you get sued or have an issue with an employee or whatever. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's what we do.
That's awesome. So Warner has been a long-time partner with the Chamber and supports us in a number of ways. Why is that? What's made you decide to get involved and engaged with the Chamber?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably true for any place, any city, but I feel like especially in Holland, you really can't be involved in the community if you're not involved with the Chamber. I'm a Holland transplant, and I mean, I've talked to Jody about this. I feel like Holland, for whatever reason, can be a hard place to get to know people. And when I talked to people about it, everybody said, get involved with the Chamber. And so, you know, I did Leadership West Coast, not the current class, but the one that just graduated, and I see a bunch of my people out here, which is awesome. And just to be able to get around, see the community. I know Mark did that, Jennifer did that. We serve on boards, we, you know, go to the events, we sponsor the events. And I think, for me at least, I feel like the Chamber, it's obvious that they're trying to make connections, whether that's connecting people with people or businesses with resources. And so from both a professional and really a personal level too, I think being involved with the Chamber is just kind of a no-brainer.
I hope that was recorded.
Did you get that? Later.
I feel like I need to pay her for those remarks. Talk to me a little bit about this commitment along the lakeshore, because it goes beyond the Chamber, right? Your engagement and investment.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, we're a statewide firm, but here in Holland, we've been here for a long time. I think a little over 30 years. So we're committed to the area. I think all of us that work in the office here feel, you know, I think we feel like it's a privilege to be here. A lot of you probably saw Jennifer up on the stage last week at the annual Community Foundation event. I mean, that's an event that we sponsor year after year, because we feel like here the Community Foundation does such great things. And that's just one example of an organization that is great for the community. So you know, it's a great place to live, it's a great place to work, and so I think Warner generally and the Holland office specifically, we're happy to do what we can, give back time, resources, whatever, to keep it that way.
That's awesome. Will you join me in thanking Beth and the team at Warner for their support of the chamber? So you know that if you come to a chamber event, we'll always build in some networking for you, and today is no exception. And so we're going to give you a little talking point and a little bit of time here to discuss. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do. Around your table, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself, your name, your company, and an answer to this question that I believe is up on the board that I cannot see. It says, in the last 7 days, which moment has given you the greatest sense of purpose? Okay. What purpose did you find, the greatest moment of purpose in the last 7 days? So you each have 1 minute to describe that question at your table. With that, go. Here's your 1-minute warning. I know. It's always hard to believe. I hate to put an end to good networking, but I'm going to call you back in. It's time. If you didn't get all the way around, the good news is you've got a great talking prompt for when the program is over. So I hope you'll continue those conversations and the networking at the end of the program as well. You know, one of the core values at the West Coast Chamber is deliver remarkable experiences. And for us, that can mean that we need to bring in remarkable speakers that are going to challenge us and bring us great information. And that's hard to do. We continue to try to raise that bar, and it's hard to find remarkable speakers that we can afford without having to raise the prices for our programming. But when we have great friends at organizations like Huizinga Gamache who are bringing a speaker into town and then call the chamber and say, hey, we've got this speaker and we think the chamber might enjoy hearing him as well, and we're happy to cover the cost of that for you if you'd like to have him speak at Wake Up West Coast. That might have been the easiest yes I've had all year. It was such an easy yes that we even switched the day and the week for Wake Up West Coast. I mean, who knew you could do that? It's not even the second Tuesday. But we're thrilled to have the support of our members for something like this. And the team at Huizinga Gamache is just awesome to be able to share this with us. Tim is the founding partner there and has been there for 29 years and is going to share a little bit of their story and then introduce Zach for us this morning. So with that, thank you again, Tim, for bringing Zach to us, and tell us a little bit more about Huizinga Gamache.
And Britt and the rest of the team of the Chamber here, thank you so much for making our community a great place to live. My personal story is I've lived and traveled many places. I've now been in this community for 23 years, and it's because of every one of you. The great leaders and the great members of our community make this an incredible place to live. So thank you for making a difference every day. I want to just quickly recognize our team that are here. So if you guys could stand up. We have Katie, Roger, Tim, Rachel, Cody, Lance. Every one of these people, including the rest of our team, are passionate about one thing, and that is helping not only our clients live better lives, but members of our community to live better lives. All of these people are passionate about this, and our gift to you today is Zach and his great work. So thank you, team. Thank you for the great work that you're doing every day. Zach today is going to talk about purpose. He's going to talk about why each of you matter, and also how can we create moments of purpose of other people. So he's going to talk about that, but I want to share my purpose. It really occurred to me only about 8 years ago. 1997, a client walks into my office, asks one question: when can I retire? 1997, I'm just getting into the business. I'm in my mid-20s, not having a lot of confidence. So these clients asked me this question. 6 weeks later, we answered the question for him. I asked them a question, and I just said, why aren't you already retired? I don't remember that question, though. Why that's important is 18 years later, we're now in the year 2015. This client is in hospice. His name is David. I go visit him last week of his life. He's on his bedside, on his back. I pull up a chair right next to him. I went there for one reason, and that's to say thank you for having the confidence in that 25-year-old 18 years ago. He stops me right there. Tim, I need you to stop. I need to tell you something. Do you remember the first time that I met you? Yeah, I remember. Do you remember what you said to me? I said, Dave, that was 18 years ago. No, I don't. He repeats the story. And this is where I start to crack up. As you can see, Tim, my body's about to check out. But I want to tell you something. That question that you asked me 18 years ago allowed me to see things and do things that I never thought were possible without your small encouragement. I want to thank you. That's purpose. I've had the opportunity to spend the last couple days with Zach. One of the things that's going to happen here this morning is you're going to want more. We have a small time frame. He's got a lot of material. We've incorporated Zach's work on our team. We have worked on values. We have worked on team values. How can we make a difference in the lives of our client and members of our community? And this is stuff that is hard. So many companies have a vision statement, a mission statement, a purpose. How many people actually live it and breathe it every day? Easy to put something on a marquee, much harder to do. Zach's work has inspired me. I saw him speak about 3 years ago, and because of that interaction, it really led to today. So thanks. If it weren't for you, Zach, you wouldn't be here today, and I wouldn't be here today. So thank you, Zach. Zach, come on up here. PhD, he's worked with many companies, including the likes of Delta, the National Park Service, Hewlett-Packard, amongst Marriott, many others. His work is captivating. The homework today, we have a book that all of you will be able to, or at least as many of you possible will be able to get today. If you don't get it, make sure you get the book and practice the items that Zach is going to share. Please give a warm welcome to Zach Mercurio.
Thank you. It's great to be here. That question you asked, and you answered at the table, when's the last time you experienced purpose in the last 7 days? How many of you all have asked that question of yourself in the last month? Raise your hand. Like 3, 4. Some people who were at my session last night. How many of you all have thought about something that stresses you out in the last month? Raise your hand. Our mental narratives are out of whack. We focus all of our attention on the things that extract our energy. We focus other people's attention on the things that extract our energy, and we tend to not intentionally practice paying attention to the things that give us energy. And one of those things, one of the key predictors of our energy, one of the key predictors of resilience, one of the key predictors of motivation, for the last 100 years, the research is clear, is purpose. How many of you all, your moment had to do with other people? Raise your hand. Contributing. How about when you got your direct deposit? No, right? Or when you made it to the weekend? Or when you got that quarterly earnings report? No. When we ask that question of thousands of people around the world, in almost every occupation, nobody talks about what they get, what they've acquired, what they've achieved, what they've made it through. People consistently talk about how they contribute, how they matter to other people. And that is the prerequisite for experiencing purpose, is experiencing mattering. What David said to Tim is an example of purposeful leadership. David showed Tim the evidence of his significance, showed him that he had purpose. He said it was 7 years ago, but the interaction that gave David this opportunity occurred 18 years prior. Right? Imagine if Tim didn't have to wait all those years to see his significance. That is what we're going to be talking about today. The practices, the leadership and organizational practices to ensure that people see their significance regularly. How do you create an environment that shows people the evidence of their significance so they can see and believe right now, today, when you go back into your workplace, that they have purpose? And it's more critical than ever. Couple disclaimers before I really start, although I feel like I've started. The first is that I know the luxury of my job is I don't have to do your job, right? How great is it to be a speaker? I just get to fly in here, pop on stage, talk about all these things you should be doing, and you have to go back and do your job. right? I've spent the last 15 years studying what makes work meaningful, what contributes to thriving organizations. But you have to go do your work. I get to get on a plane and leave. That's the luxury of my job. I get to study how people work. You have to do your job. You are the context expert, right? You are the expert in your job, your business, your day-to-day life. Some people call me a content expert, but you're the context expert. So if I introduce a practice today, and you're thinking to yourself, oh, I don't know if that would work here. He doesn't know what we do. I want you to think, how can I make this work here? How can I take something and make it work here in my organization and where I am? The second disclaimer is that psychologist Hermann Ebbinghaus in Germany finds that you'll forget about 90% of what you hear today in the next 6 days. That's exciting, right? Some people are like, we should just go back to the waffles and eggs. That is if you don't do anything with it. If you don't do anything differently. This is a complete waste of time if you don't do anything differently as a result of it. So I want you to think about what is one thing you will do differently based on what struck you here today. So let's dive in. We are going to be spending our time on the prerequisite for purpose, which is the experience of mattering. And in 2022, the U.S. Surgeon General, who's America's top medical doctor, for the first time weighed in on what needs to happen in our U.S. workplaces to address the nation's mental health crisis. This is a big deal. The U.S. Surgeon General, America's top medical doctor, is for the first time weighing in on what needs to happen in the places that you all have architectural power over, the workplace. And one of the things that they talked about needing to happen was to create mattering at work, right? The crux of these recommendations. Now, what is mattering, right? Mattering comes from two things. When people experience dignity. Dignity is that people have inherent worth regardless of what they do or don't do for you. Oh man, this is hard as an organization, right? People have inherent worth and they need to feel worthy regardless of what they do, produce, or what they don't produce. And they need to feel that worthiness first. People will not care about anything you do as an organization until they feel cared for. It's almost impossible for anything to matter to people until they believe that they matter. When someone doesn't believe that they matter, it's easy for nothing to matter. Think about the last time you've been super motivated to do something when you felt like, this doesn't really matter, or this person doesn't care about me. Not often. Yet we do it all the time in our organizations, and I'll show how. And meaning. This is experiencing my work and what I do as positive, purposeful, and significant. The place where I spend a third of my waking life. Do I experience what I'm doing as purposeful and significant, regardless of what I'm doing? And mattering comes first. It must come first. And it must come first now. Over the last 3 years, we've learned a lot about what's really happening in workplaces. And it's been revealing. The Greek root word of apocalypse, which some people called the pandemic, is apocalypsis, and it means to reveal. And I think that what has happened over the last 3 years is we've revealed a lot about what's going on with people and in their lives and in organizations. And there are several conspiring forces that led up to that U.S. Surgeon General announcement. The first is that we know that people more than ever are reflecting on the quality of their jobs and of their lives. People are asking, why me, why here? Why do I want to spend my time here? How am I treated here? Here's what's important as an organization to know. We were talking about this earlier. Literacy rates around the world are higher than ever. Educational attainment is higher than ever. Access to diverse income streams is higher than ever. Therefore, choice of where, when, and how people work are going to perpetually increase. And with discernment, and with choice comes discernment. Discerning, how do I want to feel in the place where I spend all of my time? Just giving someone a paycheck is not enough. I liken it to like if you don't invest in creating cultures where everybody feels like they matter, in the next 10 years, it'll be like being a business without a website. You'll be perpetually understaffed. You'll be perpetually dealing with turnover. You'll be perpetually tinkering with wages to try to lure people back. People more than ever, this call to rehumanize the workplace, this announcement is a result of this increased reflection on the quality of our jobs and of our lives. People are going to be more discerning, and they should be, because they're human beings spending a third of their lives away from the people who love them in the places that we have responsibility over. We also know people have realized that they're essential. The government has named some people as essential. Leaders who create mattering for people treat everybody as essential. And people are coming back into our routines and our organizations asking, do I feel essential? We know that there's not only job insecurity, but there's health insecurity. We have the unemployed returning to work. Many of you may employ or work with or be somebody who's coming back to work. One of the biggest risk factors for the unemployed are feelings of worthlessness, uselessness, and insignificance. And then we have rising calls for social justice and inclusion, rightfully so. All of these things come together for this moment, a potential meaning deficit. We can fill that meaning deficit through creating mattering for people, through making sure everybody feels significant. I believe that the skill and organizational practice for creating mattering is the quintessential skill for the next generation, and data is showing that. So what is mattering? Mattering is the belief that we're a significant part of our organization, of the world around us, that comes from feeling valued and knowing how we add value. The need to matter is not a generational preference. For example, how many of you all would prefer to feel insignificant? Raise your hand. Right? There's multiple generations in this room. Nobody's like, yeah, I'd really prefer to be purposeless at work. You know, some people are like, oh, the darn Gen Z or millennials, all they want is meaning. Think about that. All they want is coherence and significance and meaningfulness. Who wants those things? We all do, right? The need for mattering is not a generational preference. It's a basic human instinct, a fundamental need and universal longing. Researchers find from the moment you were born, the first reflex you had was to tilt your head upward and look for someone to value you. When my first son was born, I remember I went down and I didn't know what I was doing. I was like, oh no, there's a human I have to take care of. But I went down and I remember he reached out and he grasped my index finger. What I didn't know at the time was I was experiencing 6 million years of finely tuned programming that programs our first instinct as a human to reach out and grasp for significance to someone else. In fact, our ability to procure mattering to someone else in the first moment of our lives is the only reason why we're here right now. We have a survival instinct to matter, and it never goes away. It evolves into adulthood, into the need for caring relationships, into the need to feel significant to those around us, and into a universal longing that's seen across cultures, across socioeconomic status, across occupational types, that people have the instinct to matter. In fact, we search for mattering before we search for food. Creating mattering for someone at work is about as touchy-feely as feeding someone who's hungry. And just like not eating or not having any other survival instinct met, when we don't meet that instinct, the results can be disastrous. And the data is indicating, not you, but collectively we are not meeting that instinct. We're failing to meet that instinct. Upwards of 47% of people say they feel forgotten. Almost 60% of Americans feel left out. 33% of people feel isolated or lonely in the world. Now, you may look at these statistics and be like, yeah, I've seen articles or blog posts on this. Look at your table right now. 3 out of the 5 people at your table feel lonely, left out, or undervalued in some way. Right? Every part of these statistics is a real human being living a life as vivid, complex, and as important as your own. We know that almost 65% of people feel underappreciated and undervalued at work. Close to 70% of workers claim they weren't recognized once in the last 12 months. And almost 80% of workers say that a lack of appreciation was a major reason why they left their job. But here's the gap. Research consistently finds that upwards of 85% of people say experiencing meaningfulness in their work is a daily top priority. Meaningfulness as in significance. I want to make a very important note here. There is a difference between the meaning of work and the meaning in work. Someone may work for a paycheck. That's the meaning of work. That's a noble reason to work, the meaning of work in someone's life. But meaning in work is what people experience when they're there. Right? Someone can work for a paycheck and still want to experience meaning in their work. And we see this all the time in our work with frontline workers. What happens when this instinct isn't met is feelings of invisibility often result in two actions: acts of withdrawal or acts of desperation. Has anybody heard of quiet quitting? Quiet quitting is the inevitable withdrawal response of a worker who doesn't feel like they matter. Other withdrawal responses are isolating, withholding information. The terminal withdrawal response is leaving an organization. Or people who feel invisible or undervalued will act out in desperation, complaining, protesting, blaming, a bad attitude, a difficult person. Someone once told me after a session like this, they said, "Zach, what do I do with the office Eeyores?" Eeyore, like the Winnie the Pooh donkey thing, that's always sad. I said, "What do you mean Eeyores?" "Yeah, the people that just complain all the time, or they're always giving negative feedback." I go, "What do you currently do?" And they say, "Well, we try not to CC them on emails anymore." We're trying to push them out the door. What do you think somebody who is acting out for attention in these ways, that childhood psychologists find that acting out is usually a result of lack of feeling significant, needs? What's the last thing they need? Probably to be avoided, right? So then we perpetuate these cycles. So feelings of invisibility result in acts of withdrawal or acts of desperation. And we're seeing this. We're seeing the acts of withdrawal. In one of the largest studies on why people left a job over the last 3 years, researchers at MIT studied over 34 million profiles of people who left their work and found that lack of respect, lack of feeling included, lack of feeling valued, also known as toxic culture, was almost 10 times more predictive than pay or benefits in terms of pushing someone to actually leave the organization. Pay and benefits are important, but I want you to really think about this. Pay compensates people for their time. It's compensation. It compensates people for their time and their skills. Money does not value people. It's a symbol of their value, but it does not value people. Only people can value other people. So there's a big difference. We also know that failure to recognize employee performance, failure to be recognized, was almost 3 times more likely to compel someone to make the decision to leave. That's things like no recognition or unnoticed performance. Some of these other ones are like job insecurity and reorganization, that's being organized out of a job, high levels of innovation, being asked to do too much without the resources to do them, or poor response to COVID. But what I highlighted here should be really hopeful for you all because it's directly in the locus of control of the organization and the leaders. The things that actually keep people in our organizations and motivate them are the things that happen in our everyday interactions. So remember, it's really hard for anything to matter to someone who doesn't believe that they matter. It's very difficult for someone to care about anything until they feel cared for. So there are 2 sides of how to do this, the leadership skills of creating mattering, of how to make sure people can see their purpose. The first is people need to know that they're valued. These are things like knowing people's full names, asking about people's lives, knowing their struggles, checking in on them, and then making sure people know how they add value. What are my unique strengths? How do my unique strengths make a difference? Do I feel relied on? Do I feel indispensable? Do I feel like I'm contributing to this bigger purpose? Now, you may be looking at these things and like, why are you here? Why do you have a job? This should be like common sense. It's like kindergarten morality, right? Unfortunately, common sense is not always common practice. And we're seeing that in the data. For example, look at your to-do list today. How many of these things made it on? How many of your organizations, and you may be doing this, are developing, rewarding, and evaluating leaders on these behaviors? Do you know your FedEx driver's last name? Did the barista that served you your coffee, did you read their name that's on their name tag and call them by their name? At the airport, when you saw that custodian or janitor cleaning the bathroom, did you stop and say thank you, right? Common sense is not always common practice when it comes to creating mattering. When it comes to leadership development, we typically rely on intuition, like this person will be a good person because they were a good engineer or good line leader in a manufacturing facility. Intuition does not scale. Intuition does not scale. Practices and skills do. So we have to turn this common sense idea of mattering into common practice. I want you to think about right now the moment in your work when you most felt like you mattered to someone else. Think about that moment in your work when you most felt like you mattered to someone else. I want you to think about what that person did, what behaviors they did, what they said. And what you'll find is that there are skills that other people use to show us how we matter. And those skills tend to fall in one of these three major areas. People feel like they matter when three things are happening. When people are noticing us, when we feel seen and heard. There is a big difference between knowing somebody and noticing somebody, though. You can know your best friend but not notice that they're suffering or struggling. You can know your team members but not notice that one of their parents was in the hospital and they've had to become a caretaker recently and checking in on them. You can know your team but not notice that somebody keeps repeatedly struggling on a work project and they need help. Noticing is a deliberate act and practice. The second is when you thought about that moment, or when you're thinking about it right now, you may have felt affirmed. Affirmation is much different than appreciation or recognition. Appreciation is showing gratitude for someone's presence. Recognizing is elevating their work so other people can see it. But affirmation is showing people exactly how their unique gifts make a unique difference. It's specific. Or you may have felt needed. Someone relied on you for a problem, to solve a problem. Someone needed your skills. When people feel replaceable, don't be surprised when they act replaceable. When people feel irreplaceable, they will act irreplaceable. They'll show up and they'll commit. So feeling needed. Human beings are optimized when they feel needed. I want to give you an example of the power of mattering. This is Ellen. She's a janitor at Colorado State University. She was part of a research study we did on how people experience meaningfulness in their work and frontline work. We embedded ourselves with a group of janitors for a year and a half, and we were studying what brings purpose in this difficult work. We asked all of the janitors, tell us about a time in your work when you experienced the most amount of purpose in your work. Ellen proceeds to tell me, Zach, it's when I'm cleaning the university dormitories on Monday mornings after the weekend. Okay, so I was a PhD student at the time, and I broke researcher mode, and I'm like, oh man, that sounds gross. Which is not what you're supposed to say. And I was like, why is that the moment you picked? And she said, well, Zach, it's the job I don't like doing the most. But every time I go in there, I cross the threshold of that bathroom. I say to myself, I'm cleaning this bathroom so that these kids don't get sick. And I keep saying to myself, I'm cleaning this bathroom so that these kids don't get sick. People who experience high levels of mattering in their work and therefore purpose tend to develop a so that mentality. They can link whatever it is that they're doing with its inevitable human impact. What is purposeful is not always pleasurable. Contributing is often inconvenient. And she was able to do that. But you'll notice that she has hats on her lap. She also crochets winter hats for all of the students that are in the dormitory that she's cleaning that semester. And I said, why? And she said, it's so that when I go to my car in the winter and I see just one student wearing one of these hats, I'm reminded of why my job exists. You're like, oh, that's awesome. I want to hire Ellen. But what we find is that people who develop this perspective at one point in their career have experienced a profound moment of mattering, just like Tim did. What you don't know about Ellen is she was near homelessness before she got this job. She said every job rejected her except for this one. But she said in her first 2 weeks on the job, she was saying to herself, I wish I could have done something more with my life. Why am I just a janitor? And she goes, I was visibly struggling. I was unmotivated. And that was when, she said, her supervisor noticed that she was struggling. He brought her into a break room, and he had her read the definition of the word custodian as a person responsible for a building and everyone in it. And she said, that was the first time in my life that someone showed me I was worthy of responsibility. She's been at the university for over 30 years as one of the most sought-after custodians. A 2-minute interaction with the supervisor. That noticing that she was struggling, that affirming her worth, that showing that she was needed, was a moment that changed the trajectory of her life and her career. Moments of mattering in any job can change the trajectory of people's career and of their lives. Research finds it increases self-worth and motivation. Research finds it increases the neurotransmitters dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin. You don't have to remember those words. They control for mood, movement, and motivation, also known as work. They are known to improve relationships, lower the risk of anxiety and depression, and can predict lower stress. Researchers in Tennessee researched over 1,000 people, took blood and urine samples every month, and were measuring for stress hormones like cortisol in the blood objectively. And then they had them map the relationships in their life and in their work, and they had them rate how much they felt like they mattered to those relationships. The people who experienced more mattering to the people in their work experienced objectively lower stress hormone levels in their blood. Mattering to others when that instinct is met is like being nourished, just like eating is. And here's what's powerful, right? Creating experiences of mattering is a skill and it's a practice, and we can learn it. So let's jump in. I'm going to spend the rest of our time giving you some skills that I want you to think, how can I do this? But then especially if you lead an organization, I want you to think, how can we scale these basic skills to every leader in our organization? So the first skill area is noticing people. I want to give you a story that shows this noticing practice in action. There was a 5-year-old boy who was growing up in Brooklyn. He was the son of a single mom. He said that he only had one toy growing up, and that toy was a deck of playing cards. And he would bring it to the Brooklyn Library, and he would shuffle the deck of playing cards because his mom would drop him off for childcare at the Brooklyn Library and then pick him up. And he said that about a week after he started going there, a librarian came up to him and said, "Hey, I noticed that you come here and bring these playing cards. We just got a book in on how to do a card trick. Would you like it?" And she sat down with him and taught him the card trick. And he said when his mom picked him up, he showed her the card trick, and she was floored. So happy, smiled so big. She said it was the first time, he said it was the first time he had seen her smile that big. And that young boy grew up to be David Blaine, the world-renowned magician and illusionist. And he said in a podcast, if it wasn't for that librarian noticing him, he would have never found out that he had this passion. But I want to dissect the leadership practice here that the librarian did. The librarian saw thousands of people every day, but she noticed something unique about him, noticed personal uniqueness, thought about him when he wasn't there, offered him an action to show him that he was thought about. That's the practice of noticing. Noticing others can also galvanize teams. Ernest Shackleton set off on the Endurance in January of 1915 to explore Antarctica, and his ship became stuck in a floe of sea ice, and it was being slowly crushed behind his crew. They weren't going to be able to get out for 20 more months. It was almost certain death. He did not give a big motivational speech. He did not start ordering people around. When we look at diaries of his men during that time, they said he started coming around to us, asking us what our favorite holidays were. And he would bring out stores of food and have these holiday parties on the ice. One of his crew members loved American football, so he had an American football tournament out on the ice. He would talk to the astronomers that were there about the stars. He would go up and scrub the decks of this ship that was being crushed with the people responsible for scrubbing the decks. And he says, as I was doing those things, I would ask him, do you have any suggestions for me? What are your concerns? One of the things in his diary he asked, what is your biggest worry? And how can I help? He was a noticer. Now, he sailed with some other men for 800 miles in an open-air boat to go get help, and he came back and he rescued all of the men. And the diaries say that he did not come back and say, hey, you're saved. He came in and started checking in with how each person was feeling. One of the crew members' diaries said, those were the best years of my life. How do you go from being stuck in a block of sea ice to having it be the best year of someone's life? They felt noticed. I was working with special operations officers in the U.S. military last year, and I remember a special ops training guy said to me, Zach, people think the key ingredient of a lethal unit is toughness, but it's love. No one is going to sacrifice themselves for me if I don't know their kids' names. No one is going to trust me if I don't know their struggles and I don't know them. It's love. So how do we do this? Create the space to see people, right? Create the space in your routines and in your meetings and wherever you are, little spaces to see people. We run around consistently from one thing to the next. I sometimes observe Zoom meetings of clients, and this is how they typically go. They'll jump in and be like, all right, I know nobody wants to be here, but let's get through the agenda. Or it'll start this way. How's everybody doing? Good? Yeah, if I'm not good, am I going to be like, not me? No, how's everybody doing? Good? Or how's it going today? Or people go around and say, oh, I'm kind of overloaded, I'm really tired. And then the leader will be like, all right, let's get on with the agenda. You just normalize despair, right? Create spaces in your one-on-ones, in your meetings, to check in with how people are doing, to notice them. Create the space to see people. Ask about, check in, remember people's personal details of their lives, right? Ask better questions. Practice compassion. If you notice that someone's struggling, offer an action to alleviate that struggle, however imperfect it is. Empathy is understanding what someone's going through. Compassion is empathy plus action. A simple example of this is I was coaching a leader, and he had a meeting, and he asked people how they were doing, and some people went around and they said, oh, I'm just overloaded. And he immediately said, hey, that meeting we have on Friday? Why don't you take that off and get caught up? All of a sudden, all the nonverbals in the room relaxed. And guess what? She came to the meeting because she felt better she was less stressed about her work just in that moment. That's a small act of compassion. Ensure people feel heard and appreciate people's small everyday acts. Here are some of my favorite practices. I got to work with a big distribution center, and they were scored really low on their engagement surveys, except for one team. And I went to this one team, and I said, what the heck do you do here? Can you just teach everybody to do it? And they said, it's our leader. She just gets us. We do anything for her. So I went to the leader, and I said, what do you do? And she said, well, it's very simple. 3 years ago, I started taking out this notebook, and on Friday mornings, I would write down my team members' names, and I'd write down one personal detail I heard them talk about that week. Kids starting a new sport, going on a vacation, or a work struggle, struggling with this project. And she says, on Monday mornings, I look at that notebook, and that's the first thing I do, and I schedule a 3-minute check-in with each of them that week. She has 20 team members. That's an hour over the course of a week. She says that's all that I do. I am not asking you to keep a personal logbook on your people. That is not what I'm asking you to do. What I am asking you to do is have some sort of leadership practice for noticing your people, for remembering details about them, understanding how they're struggling so you can offer actions to help. Oftentimes, we don't collect the data we need to notice people. One of the reasons why we don't do that is because we typically ask bad questions. Think about the questions you ask in your meetings or in your organizations. Like sometimes we say, like, how are you? How are you is not a question, it's a greeting. Right? I travel a lot. I have an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old. If someone asks me how I am, I typically don't know how to answer because there's a lot there. So I just say, good, you, right? But if someone asks me, hey, what is your attention today? What have you been thinking about most today? What kind of day have you had so far? What's been most meaningful to you today? What are you struggling with? How can I help? Those are the questions that can actually give us the data to see people. So how can you ask questions that give you the data to see people? And how do your leaders know which questions to ask people? And then finally, create some way to check in on people. This is my favorite process. It's called the green, yellow, red check-in. Here's how it works. You're the leader at the beginning of a meeting. You say, hey, we're going to go around and we're going to share how we're doing. Green means we're good, we're in flow. Yellow means we're a little bit reactionary, like I'm stressed, things aren't going as well as I would like. And red means I'm completely offline. And you have them go around and they share their color. Green, yellow, red. Your job as a leader is not to psychoanalyze people and change their color. Your job as a leader is to simply let the awareness be. Because here's what happens. If Tim says that he's a red in a meeting, do you think I'm going to vigorously debate a project with him in front of everybody that day? Probably not, because that's going to extract his energy. Do you think when we're walking to the next meeting and Tim's a red, do you think I'm going to be like in my head, Tim was a red, I hope he really figures that out? Or am I going to say, hey, Tim, how are things going? What we find is that this awareness on a team and as a leader gives you the data to understand how people are doing, which gives you the ability to ask them how they're doing. It's powerful. We did this with a group of nurses, and we split them up into 2 groups. Now, anybody work in healthcare? Okay, well, if you're in healthcare and you've ever attended a nursing huddle at the beginning of the shift, here's how it goes. Here's what's wrong in every room. Have a great shift, right? that's not exactly the way to reduce burnout. And so what we did with one group is we had them do this green, yellow, red check-in. The other group, we didn't do anything. And we measured things like patient satisfaction and engagement. And what we found is that those who were doing this had higher patient satisfaction, higher engagement, lower levels of burnout. And when we asked why, they said, we're just having better conversations in the break room. Social support is one of the key mitigators of burnout. And then finally, schedule your good intentions. I'm the nicest person in the world when I'm out walking my dog. I think of all the people I should thank, all the letters I should write, all the calls I should make. When I get to my office, I have a big to-do list. Put it on your calendar, right? If you have that good intention, schedule it. Schedule that check-in to notice someone's work, to write them a thank you note. Those little moments go a long way. So once we notice people, we can affirm them, right? And real affirmation is showing people how their uniqueness makes a unique difference. Again, it's different than appreciation or recognition. One way we can do that is to collect and tell better stories. That distribution center I worked with, they distribute small widgets that go to a medical device manufacturer. One of the products that's manufactured and fabricated is an MRI machine. And that MRI machine serves many customers, yet these people are 3, 4, 5 steps removed from that end user. And I went into this session, and people were not listening to me. They were completely disengaged. And I just stopped the session. I said, why are you here? A woman in the front started crying. And she said, you know, I've been here for 12 years. No one's ever asked me why I'm here. But last month, I was diagnosed with an early stage cancer. And she's really struggling to get through this. And she turns to all these other distribution center managers in North America who were not paying attention, who were now paying attention. And she said, you know, I'm realizing right now why my job exists. I was diagnosed with an early stage cancer. I looked up at that MRI machine. I saw the Philips logo on that MRI machine. And I remember that we distribute a part that goes into that machine. And she goes, I'm realizing right now that my job has existed for the last 12 years to save my own life. You talk about an antidote to employee disengagement. We started telling those stories at the distribution center Packer safety meetings. And turnover went down, engagement went up. There's correlation, obviously not causation, but that yearning for meaning was unlocked. Collect and tell stories of the work's impact to your people. You may not be making MRI machines, but if any job that you have exists, it serves some human being at some point. Whether it's a team member, a leader, show people, tell people the story of that impact. Put a face to people's name. Adam Grant, people put a face to people's tasks. Adam Grant at the Wharton School, when his first daughter was born, he noticed that all the signs in the hospital were saying, wash your hands so you don't get sick. And he knew that the hospital was having problems with hand washing procedures, which is the simplest way you can prevent diseases. And so what he did is because he's Adam Grant, he split the hospital into two, and he kept the signs on one side of the hospital as the same over the soap dispensers, but on the other half of the hospital, he put signs up that says, hand hygiene prevents patients from catching diseases. And he wanted to know what would happen. He had people objectively measure soap levels after controlling for numerous factors like traffic and soap usage, and he had objective observers covertly measuring the rates of hand washing. What he found was remarkable. There was no effect when he looked at these signs. But when researchers looked at the soap levels for these signs, there was 33% more soap use and almost 10% more hand washing, objectively. Make sure that before you tell people what to do or how to do it, that you're showing them why it matters to someone else. Put a face to the task. A simple way to do it is just to give a better thank you or good job. How often do you say thank you or good job? Like, hopefully every day. Here's a good rule for everybody in this room. If you want to be a better leader instantly, anytime you say thank you or good job, go one step further and show people the difference that they make and how they make it. Here's an example. You can use this SBI model. Describe the situation, when and where it occurred, describe the behavior, and then describe the impact that it had on you or other people, and name their strengths. I'll give you an example. So if I were going to thank Tim, I could say, hey, at the beginning of this session today, when you were on stage, that's objectively what happened. It was the beginning of the session, and Tim was on stage. I'm not the supervisor now that just says thank you at 1 o'clock every day. Like, I noticed that moment. Tim can't argue that I was there and he was there. And then B, describe the behavior and describe the strengths the person used in that moment. So Tim, when you were on stage today and you were introducing the session, you told a story of how you developed a sense of purpose. Like, you're a storyteller. That really took intentionality and a lot of positivity and a lot of courage to do that. I named some strengths. And then finally describe the impact that it had. So, for example, I'll put it all together. Tim, at the beginning today, when you were on stage and you told that story about how you found your purpose, it really demonstrated how positive you are, how intentional you are, how much you care about this purpose work. And if someone wasn't wanting to pay attention today, before that story of seeing the power of this, and they started paying attention and they took one practice away that could change the trajectory of someone else's life, that's because of how you introduced it today. So thank you, right? It's much different than just saying, hey, thanks, Tim. Thanks for having me. You can use this when you thank your teams as well. Think about the situation, the behavior and strengths, and then the impact that it has on others. Another way is how you talk about projects and work in your organization. If I'm delegating the task to Tim to do the intro, instead of saying, hey, Tim, really need someone to intro the speaker, can you do that tomorrow at 9? Right? How many of you all have ever been motivated to do something because someone told you to do it by a certain time? No. But yet we do this in organizations all the time. Before you tell people what to do or how to do it, show them why it matters. There are 3 components of a meaningful task. In any task, it doesn't matter what the job is. People need to understand the significance of the task, what it makes possible for other human beings, whether it's a team member, a team over, another facility, an end user. People need to understand why the task is necessary for a bigger whole, and people have to be reminded of why and how they can use their strengths to do the task. For example, if I were delegating to Tim, I could say, hey, Tim, have you ever been to a speaker where you learned something and you immediately applied it and it changed the trajectory of their lives? Well, you really need to be paying attention to do that. And introducing someone at the beginning is so necessary for making that environment possible. And hey, you're really positive, intentional, and you're a great storyteller. So I need you to do that. Oh, by the way, we do that at 9 tomorrow? Right? It's much different. So tell people the difference that they make. Show people story collecting and storytelling. Give people purposeful affirmation. And name people's strengths. I want you to think right now, as you're going forth with this work and this material, think about how you can show people the difference that they make. Who might need to be more meaningfully affirmed in their work? Which of these practices might you introduce to your leaders or supervisors? What can you do today? One of those things you can do today is simply to give a better thank you. And then finally, the final practice area, which builds upon the first 2, is showing people how they're needed. I know I'm a little over time, but I'll wrap it up. I want to go through this last one, so I'm not ignoring you. But I love the people in the back that give the signs up. And I feel so bad because I'm like, I'm going to go through this, but we'll be fine. I'll get you out of here. So take it. We're OK. I appreciate you. I do. So the last piece is feeling needed, right? And feeling needed happens when we feel affirmed, we know that our strengths make a difference, and that when we feel noticed. Feeling needed is treating people like they're essential. Again, this is very hard because some of you may be in industries that have this industry motto of don't forget that you're replaceable. It's not going to work anymore. That's not empowering. It's not inspiring. And it doesn't result in commitment. When people feel replaceable, they'll act replaceable. When they feel irreplaceable, they'll act irreplaceable. For example, what's your name? David. David, if I asked you to come to a dinner party tomorrow night at my house, and I said, hey, David, will you come to this dinner party? And David's like, yeah, I'll go. And then he wakes up tomorrow and he doesn't want to go. How easy is it for him to just get out of that plan? It's pretty easy. But if I said, hey, David, will you come to this dinner party tomorrow? I need you to bring dessert. David wakes up tomorrow morning and he said yes. And he's like, I really don't want to go to that dinner party, but Zach needs me to bring dessert. How hard is it to get out of that plan? Pretty hard. I'm not asking you to psychologically manipulate people to attending your dinner parties, but I am saying that psychologically, when people feel replaceable, like they're just a number, like they're just a resource for you, they are going to act that way. They will go up the street for an extra 25 cents on the hour in an instant. But when people feel irreplaceable, they will act irreplaceable. They will show up and they will commit. One great way to do that is to connect people to your bigger purpose. Every company in this room, every organization serves human beings. If your job exists on the planet, it exists to serve human beings who are living lives as vivid and complex as your own. Making sure people see how they're indispensable to that is powerful. One of my favorite stories is when John F. Kennedy was going to the Space Center to launch the Apollo missions, and he went into what he thought was a green room, but it was a mop closet. And he said, hey, what do you do here? Saw janitors there. And the janitor very calmly said, oh, I'm putting a person on the moon, and then went back to his work. Well, researchers at the Wharton School did an archival study of NASA, and they looked at photographs of NASA facilities during that time. And what they found was that in almost every NASA facility, they had what was called ladders to the moon on the blackboards that showed the work groups, the tasks they were working on that month, how those tasks enabled a tangible, measurable objective, how those objectives would enable a bigger, higher order objective, and ultimately, how those objectives would put a person on the moon by the end of the decade. NASA had over 300,000 contract workers, many of whom would never see this moon landing, and they didn't even know if this moon landing was possible. But what they did is they showed them how they were indispensable every day. You could not come into work and not see that your task, however mundane or routine it was indispensable to putting a person on the moon by the end of the decade. This is a technique called laddering. Do your people know the ladder to your moon mission, whatever it is? So show people how they're indispensable. Tell people how you miss them when they're gone. And tell people how you rely on them. The practice you could all do right now is these 5 words as a leader. The most powerful words a leader can say, I think, is if it wasn't for you. If it wasn't for you, this wouldn't be possible. If it wasn't for you, we wouldn't be able to accomplish this. Again, human beings are at their best when they feel needed. So think about someone in your organization. Think of an employee group that might need to be shown how they're needed, and say, if it wasn't for you, and show them exactly what they make possible. So again, are you making sure people feel noticed, affirmed, and needed? Do your leaders have the hard skills to do this? This is not the soft stuff. It's addressing the first thing you did as a human being when you were born, which is reach out to matter. This is the hard stuff. Do you have the skills and practices to scale this in your organization? Do your leaders know how to do this? And again, this is common sense, but it's often not common practice. One of my favorite sayings is this: always assume that your guest is tired, cold, and hungry, and act accordingly. It comes from a Navajo proverb on hospitality. I think that what our world needs and what our workplace needs is for leaders to assume the people around us feel undervalued, invisible, under-recognized, and act accordingly. I think that's the way to redeem work and revitalize our organizations. I'm sorry I went overtime, but you're awesome. Thank you. Have a good rest of your day.
Zach, thank you. I can't imagine a better reason for us to go over. I feel challenged to go back and to implement so much of what you've shared with us this morning, so thank you for that. Tim mentioned earlier there are books out in the lobby. If you're interested in learning more, there's a table on the left side of the lobby here that you can grab a book. So thank you again, Tim and Zach, for that generosity for our members. A couple of things that I want to just bring your attention to. On your table there is a QR code. We're talking about leadership today, and this is a tangible way that you can serve in our community. Scan that QR code. It'll take you to our platform called West Coast Connect, and we'll give you an opportunity to raise your hand to be a leader in our community, and we'd appreciate you considering serving in that way. Next month, we will not be back here for Wake Up West Coast. We are instead launching a brand new program called Forward Together. It's a forum on inclusivity. It will be at the Civic Center, and I hope that you'll consider joining us for that. And then we'll be back here in November and be joined by John LaDuca, and he'll be talking about company wisdom and retention, building more about what we learned here today. So with that, I'm going to say thank you for joining us today. Go make it a remarkable day. Thank you, everybody.